Welcome back to another episode of the 1834 Restoration House. I know it's been a long time since we posted anything, but it's been a long, hard winter and I've been super busy and we just haven't got much work done. But today we're going to talk about our antique boiler system. Now this thing dates back to, I'm thinking the 1930s, 1940s or so. It's really old and I've never seen any other one quite like this one before. But as it turns out, it sprung a leak over the winter, and today we're going to address that, and I'll show you how we make the repair and how to start it back up again. Like I mentioned, it's been a long, hard winter, and it's also been hard on our equipment. This is a very, very large, really old boiler, but it's sized correctly for this really old house. With 4,000 plus square feet, you need a lot of hot water in the pipes to heat a space that big economically. Now, you can probably see this bucket here. So when we started the season off, we didn't have a water leak. By the time the end of the season came along, we had a pretty substantial water leak coming out of this pump right here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to drain this bucket first, and then we'll do a boiler blowdown. I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll shut the boiler system down completely. When a boiler runs for a long period of time, it tends to collect sediment and all kinds of nasty water. So it's important to blow these things down once in a while. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off the city water. This is my blowdown valve right here. You notice I have a glove on my hand because this water is, what, 130, 140 degrees. I don't want to touch it. So I'm going to open up this valve and let some of the water out. The reason I shut the city water valve off is because if I didn't do that, we'd have cold, fresh city water coming out this valve along with hot, nasty water. And the only thing I want out of there is the hot, nasty water. If we were still in the heating season, I would go ahead and open this city water valve up and let the system refill, and then it would neutralize and everything would be okay for the rest of the season. But since this is a shutdown, I'm leaving this closed. The next thing I'm going to do is turn the power to the boiler off. Okay, that shuts down the electrics. And then I'm going to go over here and turn off the gas. Just like that. Now the burners are off and we're no longer burning gas. I'd like to draw your attention to the pressure and temperature gauge. Every single boiler has to have one of these because you have to know what is the pressure inside. You also need to know what the temperature is too. So the boiler maintains a certain amount of pressure at all times, and that's done with an air dome combined with water, and it will hold that. And so this red mark here, this is your pressure cutout indicator. Now it doesn't actually move. All it does is show where we want to see the pressure cutout. That's standard pressure for this particular boiler, and you can see somebody also made a mark on there too. The black needle, this is the actual real pressure gauge. And so this will go up and down, and as it goes down, there's a valve that opens up and allows city water in to pressurize that tank again. All right. Down here we have the temperature gauge. And this is what makes the boiler come on and off. So it's always trying to maintain about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So our job today is to get this boiler down to ambient pressure and ambient temperature. Now I'm not going to let any more water out of here right now because it's still hot and we don't want to risk cracking the cast iron parts in here. So we're going to let everything cool down nice and slow, and once it reaches regular temperature, then we'll go ahead and let the pressure off. It's been several hours now and the boiler temperature has gone down drastically. It's about 80 degrees right now, so it's safe to go ahead and release the water. So I'm going to release the pressure now into this bucket. The first step in draining the system out is to open up the zone valve, and I do that by turning this thumb screw, and eventually you're going to get where it says open, or in this case there's a red mark right there, so that means the valve is open. I'm on the second floor of the house, which is 2 floors above the basement. Now the reason I'm up here is if we're going to drain all the water out of the system, we have to open up all the bleeders up on the second floor. We don't want to do the ones on the first floor because what will happen is you'll get water everywhere. So we're going to do this in stages. First the second floor. Let's take off this cover right here. And then we'll take this out. Every radiator has a bleeder valve. These are here so that any air that gets trapped in the system can be removed, and it makes the whole thing run more efficiently. This is a special key that fits that valve. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on here and open it up. Okay, right now I'm hearing air, and that air should be, it's being sucked into the system. I can feel it with my thumb. It's being sucked rather than being blown. With the second floor radiators open, now I can open this up and we'll get a nice strong water flow. This is all of the water coming up from the second floor. So when it gets down to the level of the first floor radiators, it's going to slow way down. So in the meantime, I'm just going to drain out as much as I can and dump it down the drain. The last thing we're going to do while draining the system out is to drain out the pressure tank. So this acts like an accumulator. Inside there is a bank of air, and then water goes in and pushes against that, and it creates a kind of like a pressure spring. And that helps to maintain the system pressure. As you draw water off, suddenly it doesn't change because this thing compensates for it. But over time they tend to fill up with water as the air gets dissolved into it. And so it's a good idea to drain these things out from time to time anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and open this valve up here. First we open the drain valve. And there's no water flowing because there's a vapor lock in there, so I'm going to go ahead and open up the vent. Maybe. There we go. This boiler circulator pump is in really bad condition. Sometime during the winter it started leaking and we had to put a bucket underneath it to catch the water. But as you can see, it's really corroded and things are just looking pretty gnarly. So the first thing I did is I turned off the power, safety first. So I'm going to open this thing up and we'll disconnect the wires. Let's take a quick look at the wire here. You see right there, the insulation is broken. So the electrical wires, which are coming into this box right here, are no good. And we'll need to replace those before we put the thing back in service. But for now, let's go ahead and just disconnect. This is cloth wrapped wire. You can see the cloth coming apart there. And under the cloth is rubber insulation. And the rubber insulation is broken here and here. That's a fire hazard. So we certainly can't reuse this wire. I'm not surprised to find this because I think this boiler's probably been here since the 1930s or 40s. I know what you guys are thinking. Why in the world are you using an antique boiler? Well, here's the thing. Boilers, all they do is make hot water. And it doesn't matter how old they are. As long as they don't leak and as long as the fire still goes, you're going to get a good source of hot water out of these things. And these things will go for decades and decades and decades, and it's not uncommon in our area to see boilers this old, if not older. So I have no concerns about that whatsoever, aside from some surface rust here and there that needs to be polished off and repainted. You know, these things will just go on forever. This is a standard Bell & Gossett circulator pump. These things are all over the place, and they still make these today. And parts are readily available, so we're really not too concerned about if we can do this. We know we can, but we don't know what we're going to find until we get inside. So the first thing I'm going to do is separate the pump and motor from the housing. And this may not work too well because the bolts are really rusty. Oh, look at that. Oh, that turned really nice. I'm actually surprised that that worked as well as it did. So I'm going to go around and take all these bolts off. Okay, the bolts are out. Now I'm going to just wiggle the housing out of here. And there it is. There's the impeller. Looks like we have a plastic one. And here's the old gasket. You can see the gasket's completely tore up and no good. So that's definitely a problem. Like I said, they have rebuild kits for these pieces, and they also have replacement parts. So we'll give it a good look over and see what's going on. It's always a good idea to put the bolts back in the holes they came out of, just so they don't get lost. Okay, the next thing I want to do is see about these. I'm going to chip away at this and see if there's any bolt left here to put a wrench on. I'm just not sure if this is going to work. We may actually have to cut this off with a die grinder. Alright, let's see what happens here. Well, there's not much bolt left there. I think this bolt had a shot, and this one clearly is shot too, so I'm afraid we're going to have to come in with a grinder and cut these bolts off. Well, that didn't work out too well, so I cut the top and bottom off this bolt here, and then I pounded on it with a hammer and a drift, and it just will not come out of there. So here's what we're going to do. I bought a brand new pump, brand new flanges, and 2 gate valves, and we're going to just replace this entire works right here. Up above, there are 2 circuits that come together in a Y. Each one of those has a valve on it already, so we really don't need a valve above, but we do need a valve down here to isolate this for any future maintenance that needs to be done. And believe me, they do need maintenance from time to time. Sometimes the bearings go out, sometimes the seals go out. And if you don't take care of these things, this is what happens to it. So let's make sure that doesn't happen again. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a die grinder with a cutoff wheel, and I'm going to cut this pipe open. And the reason I'm not using a regular pipe cutter is because they don't have the circular types that are big enough for an 1.5 inch pipe. And there's not enough clearance here to run a regular one through here, so there really is no choice but to use that. And I'm a little reluctant to, simply because I don't want debris falling down in the pipe, but in this case we really have no choice. And I think that the cutoff wheel is going to give us small enough particles that anything that gets in the system will be easily flushed out. So let's get to it. Well, in spite of our best intentions, we ended up having to cut this whole thing out. So I'm just going to rebuild that entire section. And I went down to the plumbing supply house and I got some parts. So we have everything we need now to finish this. Now, we do have a couple of problems. We did discover that this pipe here is way off of plumb. So I'm going to attempt to correct that by re-sweating the solder here, get it loose, push it over, and then touch it up if necessary. And then that will line it better with this one. Okay, the first thing I'm doing here is I'm polishing this up, just kind of getting some of the crusty stuff off that's built up over the years. It'll just make it go a lot simpler that way if I do that first. So this is the copper sweat fitting, and that goes to the black iron flange. And that flange goes onto the pump like so, with a gasket and 2 bolts. So let's put this together temporarily. I'm just pinning it together. I cleaned out the threads with this brush here because at the manufacturer they didn't bother to mask those off. So we want to get the paint out of there. So let's make sure that this fits. So let's put some pipe dope on there. I'm not a big fan of Teflon tape when it comes to boiler systems. So I'm just going to go ahead and really goop it on there. Don't worry about wasting it, because you're going to need pretty much every little bit you can get to seal those threads. Be real careful not to cross thread it. And whatever you do, don't drop it. So that helps to lubricate the threads a little bit and makes a nice seal. So now I'm going to take my pipe wrench and crank that down. Good and tight. Right here I have everything assembled in kind of a dry fit mode. So we haven't soldered anything together and nothing is really bolted together tightly. But I just wanted to see how this is going to go together. Now, one thing we did add was another valve right here because we have two shutoff valves above for the return, but we don't have a shutoff valve here. So in the future, if anybody wants to do maintenance, they can simply turn those off, turn this one off, and then they won't lose quite as much water that way. I'd like to apologize because I didn't show everything that we did here. So the last thing you saw me do was I was trying to unsweat this enough that I could push it this way and straighten it up because it was angled towards this direction and we need it more uphill. So what I ended up having to do was get two of these guys together and finally got enough heat that we were able to get everything to melt, and then swung it up there and then let it cool and everything was fine. So I went ahead and I cleaned these up. These were covered with years and years of corrosion, so that's clean. So the next thing I want to do is put some plumber's flux on there. So the next thing I'm doing is this. This is a gate valve. It's brand new, made of brass. We didn't have it before, and I think it really needs to be here because if you're ever going to change pump housings or pump bearings or anything like that, you want to be able to turn it off. Otherwise, water 2 floors above you is going to come running down and pour out all over the place. So this is a really important addition. I'm just going to go ahead and goop up the inside of this one too as well, just to make sure that it's super clean and we have a really good brazing job here. Set that down until it seats. Alright, that takes care of that side. Let's go ahead and put some flux down inside there and do the other half. I've got a pipe here that I've already cut. This is actually very hot, so that's why I'm trying to move quickly. So I like to make sure that both sides of my units are properly fluxed. In case you're wondering why you have to flux it, it actually cleans the metal and it helps the solder flow better. Let's go ahead and wipe that off while it's still hot. Get all the flux off of there because flux is corrosive and it'll corrode the pipes over time. So let's get that nice and now it's hot. This is a cast iron black iron pump flange, and this is a copper sweat fitting. So this is designed to fit in here, and we'll use pipe dope which will seal the threads really good. But first, before we do that, the manufacturer, when they paint these, they don't mask the threads off. So I'm going in here and I'm just trying to grind the paint off the threads so that we have bare threads. We get a much better connection and better thread penetration. Yeah, that looks much better. Okay, so let's take this over to the table and put it together. This is a Bell & Gossett 100 series circulator pump. It's exactly identical to what we pulled out of here, except ours was completely rusted out. This one here is brand new. So I'm going to go ahead and take this flange and pin it on here temporarily. It's going to act like a bench vise since I don't have one handy. So I'll go ahead and screw these together temporarily. Now let's take this fitting and I'm going to just goop it up really good. This is black pipe dope. I'll go ahead and screw that in place. You gotta put a little bit of force into it. Okay, we'll wipe off the excess and then take it back apart. Okay, let's go back over to the works and put it back together. So the next part is really critical. The flanges have to be in perfect alignment, and the only way to do that is to have the pump in place. So I'm going to go ahead and put the flux in here. And we'll put some flux up here on this other pipe. It's still hot. Put that together. And now we'll just leave that for the moment. We're going to go get the pump, and we'll put the rest of it together in a second. Now this one here I prepared earlier. It needs the same treatment. So flux inside, and then flux up here. And I'm going to attempt to put this back on here. I don't know if it'll stay, but let's give it a shot. Okay, good. It's snug enough that it's not going to go. So I'm leaving that here and that here. So the next thing we're going to do is get the pump, and we'll pull it together with bolts and make sure everything's in perfect alignment. All right, let's take the pump and push it up in place. I'm going to take a couple of bolts and just pin the bottom temporarily, just to kind of hold it there. And once that's there, you can let go. So I'm going to go ahead and bolt everything up as close as possible to where it's going to be. But the idea here is you want to get everything exactly where it's going to be when the pump is in place. And what we're doing is we're making sure that the flanges are properly lined up before we try soldering them. Here's an interesting side note. The bolt heads take a 5/8 inch wrench, but the nuts take an 11/16 inch wrench. Not sure why they did that. But I'm going to go ahead and cinch these up now so that they're not really tight, but just a little bit snug. I just want to get everything in the right position. And one thing that could be really helpful is to take a pen, which is going to fly magically across the camera lens into my hand. Take a pen and just make a mark. It's just a reference mark so that you know that something hasn't moved. Okay, let's take the pump housing back out now. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is take these rubber O-rings and put them in the groove on the flange. They're a little bit bigger than the flange itself, so that kind of helps it stay put when you put them in. Now, put that up there. I might have to lift that up a little bit. Just kind of work everything into position. Yeah. So if everything worked out fine, the rubber thing should still be in the groove, which it is. All right, I'm going to go ahead and drop a couple of bolts in here just to pin it in place temporarily. I'll just put a nut on there too. I'm just trying to keep it from moving around and falling off. Okay, now I'm going to take the top one, make sure that the O-ring is still in there. Put the flange down on it. Drop the bolts in. I'm just going to put the nuts on a little bit just to hold it in place. I'm just going to kind of rock it a little bit, make sure everything seats down properly. And then we'll go ahead and start cinching those up gradually. We don't want to crank one all the way down, but what we want to do is go back and forth, up and down, and just kind of just gradually tighten these up. Okay, I've cinched these down kind of loosely, but evenly. Now that's the important part here, because we have cast iron flanges, we don't want to break them, so we want to tighten them down evenly, much like you do on the cylinder head of a car. So the manual for this thing says to go to 96 to 130 inch-pounds. So I chose somewhere in the middle, about 110. So I have my calibrated torque wrench. So I'm just going to go ahead and start working it. Oh, there it was. When the torque wrench clicks, then you're done. Don't go any further. Okay, that's 110 inch-pounds. I can feel it starting to come tight. There it is. 110 inch-pounds there. And 110 inch-pounds there. Okay, I'm just going to go back over them one more time and make sure that they're still sitting at 110. Yep. Yes. Yes. Sometimes you might find that after a few moments that they relax a little bit, and they can require just a little bit more torque to get to where you want to be. So now we have everything set. That is sweated. This flange is all put together along with its goop. Same thing here, it's all gooped up, and that's sweated, that's sweated, that is sweated, and that's sweated. So this guy is ready to go. Next thing we need to do is hook up the power. I also took advantage of the opportunity and I put another shutoff valve here. So now we have a valve on top, we have a valve on the bottom. This pump can now be completely isolated and removed if necessary for service. This is the old electrical cable. It's kind of ratty looking and feels kind of nasty, but the problem is this whole wiring here, and these are things you have to watch out for in these older boilers. This is cloth wrapped over rubber insulation, and let me tell you, it's really fragile, and you can already see where it's cracked and broken in places. So I pulled it off, Went down to my local electrical supply and I got me some new BX and some new wires. So now we're going to take this and hook it up. That was stubborn. So first thing we'll do is take our ground screw and hook it up to this lug right here. Alright, next we'll hook up our hot and our neutral. And put the cover back on. That completes the electrical work. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to put a rubber pad on here and then clamp this to it. And that keeps it clamped up nice so it doesn't rub on anything. Okay, now that all the work is done and we've determined that it's not leaking, the first thing we did is we went upstairs and we closed every single bleeder valve on every single radiator. As it turns out, they were already done, so we don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to go through and normalize all the valves that have been moved. They all have pink tags on them to show me that something is different, except this one, which I forgot. So I'll go ahead and open this. And these are the valves that go upstairs. Go ahead and open them all the way. They get kind of tight after a while. But when I operate these valves, and I know they're going to be closed or in an abnormal position for any length of time, I like to go ahead and just put a pink tag on to show that something has changed, as a notice to myself. I'll go ahead and open this one too. Now, everything is in the normal state except for the city water. So I'm going to turn the city water back on, and that's going to slowly refill the boiler. I'm going to go nice and easy with it. You never want to open it wide open. Just kind of crack it open, let it go for a second. And then watch. You want to make sure that there's no leaks. Feel around. Everything's dry, just like it should be. This thing right here is a pressure regulator, and it's set for 12 pounds. So with the boiler off and the valves open, it should pressurize the system to 12 psi and then stop. And that's what this thing does. They also put in a bypass valve, so if I wanted to, really get the juice in there fast, I could do that, but I don't like to, so I'm leaving it on low. And we'll come back in a minute after things have settled down. The system is being filled right now. It's coming up to pressure and it should be shutting off very shortly. But just going around and feeling all the connections, everything feels bone dry, which is what we want. Yep, everything feels good. The system is nearly full and it's slowed way down thanks to the pressure regulator valve. So in about a minute or two it'll just completely shut off. Now there's one more thing that we have to do before we can call this done. We have our special radiator key. We have to go around to every single radiator in the house, starting at the bottom floor and then going up to the second floor, and open up all the valves and let the air out of each individual radiator. I'm not going to show you every single radiator in the house because I'm sure you don't want to see it either, but I'm just going to show you two different types. This is called the baseboard type. What I like to do is take a cloth, wrap it around the base of the pipe, so if any water leaks, and I guarantee it will, that pipe will absorb it and keep it out of your wood floors. So I'll just bring this glass bowl up here, turn on the key, and then wait. Hear the air? So our goal is to get the air out of every single radiator, starting at the bottom floor, go upstairs, and then do the same thing with every radiator up there as well. Okay, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. This is a cabinet style radiator. In my opinion, a house like this shouldn't have a cabinet radiator. It should have a cast iron traditional radiator. But this is how we open it. It's real easy. Set that aside, and here's my glass bowl. I'm just going to open this up. This step is really important because hot water systems won't heat if there's air in the lines, because it's the hot water in contact with the radiator and the radiator fins that releases the heat into the room. And so if you have an air bubble in there, in severe cases the water won't even get in the radiator in the first place, and then the room feels cold. So that's all for this video. Sometime in the fall I'll come back and do another video to show you how we start our boiler system back up again for the winter.